In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in.
Bree Dusseault, welcome back to the AI Education Conversation. Really excited to have you back for part two here.
Yeah, hi. It's so great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I recall in our last conversation we had talked about we would have our customarily annual December check-in, but there's so much
Me
going
and
on that we had to check in sooner.
hey, it's AI we're talking about.
No,
So
that's absolutely
everything
right.
busy.
So so Bree, let me start with this. For folks who are listening to our conversation for the first time, tuning into this episode, why would you say that your work and the work of SERPI is important right now in this moment?
Yeah, thanks for a lovely starting question. We at SERPI are looking at how AI has the potential to shape the educational journey and experience for students, the work of being a teacher and the role of being a teacher in ways that our education systems, which have long struggled to serve all students well, and especially students from historically marginalized communities and contexts, potential for AI to actually help systems overcome some of those barriers. So I think that the what to me makes our work important is that it's not looking at just a piece or two of the AI question, but it's actually looking at the broader set of deep questions that AI may help us answer. AI is really not an end in itself. It is a set of strategies and solutions that may help us solve long and tractable problems. And I think for us, we're really curious to know if and how anything from the classroom to the boardroom level, decision makers are actually utilizing AI to start to grapple and solve problems differently. And what are the conditions and the barriers and the enablers that are making it more and less likely for teachers up through superintendents to be using AI to solve some of these problems in new ways.
Yeah, and as you described, the exploration of artificial intelligence in education is not just about AI. It's really also about looking at the foundation and the conditions of education to really understand what transformation could look like and to what extent AI is positioned to be able to do that. And I think with that charge in mind, the thing that makes this moment in time so exciting is that this conversation seems to be evolving so much over the last really 18, 19 months since the emergence of ChatGPT. And when we talked in December, the AI and education landscape appeared to have, I would say, a largely optimistic tone about our AI's role in education. I think a lot of the conversation as I was noticing it was really focused on tool application and access. Those were the two headlines I might really draw from that moment. That being said, 6 months at this given moment of time feels like a long time.
I'm,
And I'm curious, how have you seen the conversation evolve since we last talked?
I I think that we're seeing ups and downs of interest and attention. It felt like this spring, it was everything AI and it had a lot of like pop and sizzle, and every conference had an AI theme to it. Not every, but so many different stories about schools that were being reported out were mentioning whether they were using AI or not. I think that this summer there's a big story around, Los Angeles Unified contracting with a tool and really promoting that tool and getting a lot of buzz. And then that company that ran that tool essentially kind of collapsed financially before the tool could go into place. And actually there were some data privacy issues and data security issues that I think were cautionary. And so I would say that in the last month or so, we're starting to see more come back up around AI, and so I do think that it it's probably moving in the way that it should, which is AI is not something that is fully optimistic or fully pessimistic. It's something that presents it's a polarity. It presents the ability to really help further positive opportunities for kids and teachers and systems, and has the potential to continue distribution of resources inequitably and or not help students, in fact, maybe even cause harm. So I think it makes sense that the conversation would become more and more nuanced as we get more exposure to what AI in quote means in education. And honestly, as the tools are continuing to evolve, as the landscape's continuing to evolve, what I would also add is that it feels like there are a pack of kind of early adopters who are bought in and trying to figure this out. And they're a very small minority of school systems or classroom teachers, but they are there. And that tracks to what we know about kind of change theory and even like innovation adoption theory, that it's always led by early adopters. Where things can get stuck is if a change or an innovation is only adopted by the early adopters. And so I think that we're in this next year or two will probably be about how and whether AI is able to be kind of uptaken by the masses, and how what we can learn from the early adopters about what they need to thrive and be successful so that conditions can be created for more traditional users and maybe even the more skeptical but potential users of AI to be supported in that work. There are a lot of conditions that need to be laid for serious shifts to change in any landscape. So on the optimism question, I think there's still a fair amount of optimism, but it might just be more concentrated in those entities and people who are really bought in and moving forward with this. And I'm not sure if there have been any more great conditions laid since the last 6 months we spoke to encourage more folks to get into the space, except for the fact that there's just more information out there. And so if one big barrier has just been like literally not knowing what AI means, or that it's a present option for a school leader or a classroom teacher or a superintendent to put in place in their system or classroom. So at least there's more information coming out now too. But yeah, we're moving out of maybe black and white thinking into the more nuanced thinking, which makes total sense for where we're at.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, I think that's a good thing. I think that we should be highly skeptical about some of the things that we're seeing and be able to analyze, and highly optimistic as well, balancing both of those things and saying like, what is the opportunity that exists here, and what are also the potential threats and challenges to us, to our young people, to our schools, and being able to balance that conversation. And to your point, I've noticed that similarly, it felt like the pendulum was like highly optimistic going into that. And then over the last 6 months, it felt like the pendulum is swinging a little bit towards the other way. But I'm also confident, as you're describing, that it's going to continue to swing based on innovation that happens or based on new stories that come out. Obviously, the story with LAUSC is kind of, I think, one of the first major AI in education stories with a negative connotation. But tomorrow, if there's another major school district that comes out with like a massive AI use case that is actually showing a tremendously positive gain, I think that could easily swing the pendulum in the other direction.
Yeah.
I think your point too about this AI tipping point is very interesting. This idea that we're the early adopters are becoming clearer, right? Who really is actually putting their chips out there to a certain extent and going to try some things. And can we actually convert that into more systematic adoption by other entities in education over the next couple of years? And it does feel like we're broaching a tipping point where very quickly it'll determine if is this thing just a fad in education, which I really don't think it is. And I think that's just based on the technology, regardless of my own opinion of the adoption, or is this something that is actually going to have enough teeth in it to be able to be something more in how it disrupts education?
Yeah. I agree. I think even if the technology were to stop evolving today, we already have had such an introduction of technologies that have the potential and really are already changing the way that we source information, share information, approach tasks. Even if it stopped today, which we know it's not going to, there's a lot of catch up that the education system and the workforce has. And so there's the conversation around AI is a really broad one. And I think that AI means a lot of different things to different people in the context of education. For many of us, we think of it as like there's being like AI enabled tool. And that, one dimension of new ways to personalize learning or to help teachers reduce workload. But there's also another function of AI, which is the way it's changing the world around us and how that will ripple into different skills, competencies, and potentially learning standards that students need to master in ways that we may be deprioritizing or not correctly prioritizing right now. There's a lot of kind of content knowledge that the students and adults need to learn about how to use AI correctly and appropriately and effectively. So it's a lot of things. AI is both shifting the landscape and then also serving as a tool to help in that landscape or hinder in that landscape. So it's a pretty powerful force that I think will be hard to see as a fad. How quickly we're able to respond and set students up to kind of have equal opportunities to be successful in this shifting landscape is a big question we're all trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, I could not agree more, and that resonates so much. I think, to your point, even if many schools make the decision to not intentionally bring AI tools into their schools, the impacts of what AI has the capacity to bring on relationships, especially for young people, its capacity to develop deep fakes, which can obviously have tremendous impacts on things. Right there in of itself, it feels like AI literacy, even guided towards those two topics, conversations that are being had in schools with our students to be able to understand the extent to what impacts, feels like that's something 100% of schools should be doing, regardless of how they feel about AI tool adoption. To your other point, the fact that there are so many other organizations, such as the workforce sector, such as post-secondary institutions, who may also decide to adopt AI tools, or the deployment of the technology just may cause disruptions on the workforce. That in of itself may also change the behaviors of schools in terms of the types of skills they may want to prioritize some of their students, maybe the type of advice that high school counselors are giving their students as to which fields that they might want to get into based on predictions for what fields may really grow over the next decade versus fields that may be deprioritized. So it feels like, again, even if you are not wanting to directly adopt AI, there are still so many ways that to do the work of preparing your students for the world that they will be entering, which will be a different world than what it is today. There is many conversations about AI with AI that still need to happen, regardless of the actual tool adoption piece, which I think you totally named there. Speaking of conversation, I know that CERPI recently published a paper around learnings for some great conversations that you all have been having this spring. Was really excited to see the convening you all had and the group of folks that were there. And it seemed like there was a lot of great themes and headlines that came out of this conversation, again, with this coalition of stakeholders representing different spaces, some ed tech, some high school education, secondary education, post-secondary education, technology. Wondering from this paper, what were some of your big takeaways from there? What are folks across the spectrum thinking about as it relates to this conversation?
Yeah, this was a really great and special convening of folks. We brought together about 60 leaders from really diverse work backgrounds, personal lived experience backgrounds, who intersect with AI and with education in different ways. So it included systems leaders, policymakers, research and advocacy partners, ed tech partners, higher education. And there was a range of, within the group of interaction they've each had with AI in their workspaces as well. So we came together to talk about some big picture questions around what are our responsibilities, especially for leaders in each of these domains, to prepare for a future that includes AI and to build an educational system that is prepared to graduate students for that future, and is simultaneously figuring out how to bring the right versions of AI support to help solve really like gnarly, wicked problems. And so we titled the paper Wicked Opportunities because we know that there are some really what we would call like really wicked problems in the education space that have been intractable, that we have not been able to resolve. And after dumping billions and billions of dollars and lots of effort and time into the education system, we still cannot resolve like very fundamental inequities in how children and adults are getting access to resources, opportunities. And so why is that? And what opportunities do we now have with this new technology and in this emerging new landscape ahead of us? And so that was the hope, and that's kind of my precursor. So we talked about. And so what there's a larger paper if folks want to go in and find it. If you just Google Wicked Opportunity, CRPE or SERPE where I work, it should pop up. But we have a pretty long kind of white paper report on what surfaced. But, what we really found is that there's a lot of work to be done to name the set of problems that AI can help solve, to educate ourselves on ways that this technology works in ways that we can use it, and to build allyships and partnerships that span across domain or like type of work to work on this together. There was also a very important sentiment that all of us kind of landed on by the end, which is that to do this work, you really have to anchor in the community that you're trying to serve. And so in this case, anchoring in the students and the families for this work is an important element of the work. Really easy to say that. And I think that that kind of sentiment gets said a lot in education, but what that really looks like is complicated. And so what does it mean for schools to be centering on building AI literacy, AI fluency for their community and students while they're doing everything else that they have to do? And how do we build opportunities for those stakeholders to bring their voices into the problem solving that we're trying to do? Was another really important question that came up. And it really was a question without there aren't full answers to this because it's all new. I would say that some of the big takeaway that we outlined, to be a little more specific on it, is one, like we are really obligated to think at a high level or to think big about how AI can transform education. There needs to be a clear vision for the future of how AI can help solve big problems. AI is really working in service of solving big problems. And that is kind of where the conversation has to start. It doesn't start with like, what is the AI tool I want to use? It is, what is the big problem I'm trying to solve in service of a vision that I have? A second big takeaway is that we all need to be leaning in right now to help school systems like districts use AI strategically. There is an acknowledgement that leaders play this really important role leaders in different sectors play a really important role in helping systems pull this off. Systems change is really hard in the public education system. We do not have many examples of like long-standing, durable systems change. It's really challenging. Our school systems aren't wired to do that. And so this requires a lot of support and resourcing to school systems in order to do that first point, which is to like set a vision and leverage AI to resolve that vision. And so in that vein, there's kind of a third takeaway we had, which is about, being thoughtful about allocating funds to pilot and test AI initiatives, and to particularly do that in under-resourced or historically marginalized communities. So that's a very practical thing that needs to be happening, which is to put some funding into pilot and measurement and data tracking to build an evidence base of what's working, what's not, and to build some use cases or some bright spots that, kind of to your point earlier, that we can take into the conversation and help create a pathway to realizing the optimism as opposed to just hypothesizing how it works. And, a fourth takeaway that's kind of connected is just, we need to provide realistic, actionable implementation plans and strategies to help AI navigate AI adoption effectively. So like alongside these pilots, there's a lot of technical realities that we have to be figuring out because these are very sophisticated technologies. This involves student data. It involves students learning. There are privacy questions. And then there are just really big implementation questions about the fact that nobody's used generative AI tools at scale ever, including the people who need to lead this work. So the fourth finding is really about like getting realistic about, like, we need our state leaders, for example, to help schools get technical assistance and research partnerships to help them do these approaches. And we need kind of wraparound support on the technical side as well as this piloting side. So that's some of what we came up with this group of really phenomenal leaders. And I think it mirrors, we were meeting in April of this year, and I think it mirrors where some of the conversation has gone since then. And some of these topics have come to more. One thing that SERPE is starting to think about next is, how do you build an evidence base for what is working for AI, and maybe even take a step back before that. How do we even know that the ways we're defining success in this new age are appropriate or correct? So we're interested in thinking about how we're defining success as we're moving into an age of more adaptive and generative AI driven tools. Success for students, systems, and success for the workplace, and just like our society in general. And then once we've defined those successes, how are we measuring the capacity of different AI strategies to help realize those successes? There's a lot of promise in AI, but there's not a lot of data. So, and there are a lot of tools emerging. And it's hard. It's really hard for already overwhelmed leaders to and classroom teachers to suss out what to trust and what not to trust. And so this moment is really asking all of us to be building the plane while we fly it. And that's not a like really comfortable place for everybody. Some people it is like there's a profile like entrepreneur who loves that space, but like not everybody likes that. And so there's really a need to be building up evidence and examples to help guide already resource strapped leaders and teachers in their decision making so they can start realizing some of the gains. So that's the new space that I'd say, not new, but that is like the next evolution of our thinking as we reflect on that group and the paper that we put out and where we're hoping to go.
Yeah, your last few points there especially really resonate with me. I think the need for like really robust metrics that we're all aligned on feels really important and feels really urgent. And I think to your point, there have been, I think, some conversations, albeit maybe not aligned conversations around like what the broader vision of success looks like. But I think you're right that we need to now take that further and say, even beyond just creating alignment for what this vision looks like what are the actual metrics we're going to use to define success, right? And I think there are even hypotheses right now. I think one thing as an example, folks are really concerned about is the potential inequity that exists with certain places having AI versus not. And again, a lot of the way that folks are defining those metrics right now are things such as, even in the report, some of the RAND findings that we found, things such as like which school districts have training, which school districts do not, or which users have heard of AI versus which have not. But to your point, those are hypotheses. Like we actually don't even know if more people have heard of AI versus not, if that's actually a good or bad thing. We don't actually know what that means in terms of real outcomes or real net gains. And I think taking one of your other earlier points of fundamentally this technology is only effective in the sense that it like serves us and it serves like our broader goals and visions for what we want the educational experience to be. And so definitely grounding in that and aligning on a set of metrics feels like something that would be like immensely valuable for, I think, the education landscape as a whole. I personally would also advocate and say, like, I'm hoping that student outcomes or somewhere like existed on there, which again, I know is difficult in maybe the 1.0 iteration of that, just because there's going to be steps such as like awareness, things like that have to come first, but really being able to hold the North Star as like student outcomes, student growth, student learning, I think feels like an important piece of that puzzle from my perspective. The other piece that I heard you say, which I was really curious about, is I know that this convening, as you described, had a loose coalition of individuals that do have direct say, investment, a connection to either the technology side or the education side or both, in this experience. And I did actually read in a couple of spaces in the Wicked Learnings paper that you described, which I will share with any folks listening to this episode, would definitely invite digging in to really see the richness of everything that Bree just described there. There appeared at certain places to be a little bit of a sense of like distrust from between like folks that are working in schools and education and folks that work in ed tech. This is, I don't think, a surprise to anybody listening to this. I think this sentiment has existed long before AI. I'm wondering though, from like your perspective, either grounded in the conversation that took place those couple of days, or maybe even with experiences extending beyond that, like, what do you think are some of the barriers that are creating this sense of distrust between ed tech and folks who work in schools, practitioners specifically? And do you have any thoughts of like how we can get past that?
Yeah, it came up to a little bit in the forum, and then I feel like it was also a pretty loud theme at ASU GSV for folks who went to that conference, which was a week or two after our forum. And you're right, it's certainly not new, but it is an example of it's an understandable example of how I think it's so hard to get this right. So I think just to start with some of what we hear is that we hear from both sides. I talk to ed tech folks. I talked a lot more district and school folks. I talk to nonprofit organizations that have an ed tech focus. And I think what you hear on each side is that sometimes it's hard to find the common ground in the Venn diagram of shared interests between the two. And I think it speaks to the nature of the technology and the nature of the solutions that both sides are looking for. And so, I think a district perspective I've heard is that, you get an ed tech tool and it doesn't really fully fit to what a system may need. And it may not fit to exactly like the nature of the problem they're trying to solve, or it just may not actually integrate from a very technical standpoint into and become like a usable tool alongside other tool. And also the districts are we hear from districts how overwhelmed they are with so many issues. And really what they need is someone to just kind of help them quickly come in and like take some stuff off their plate and help solve a problem. And that's easier said than done. And I think that then what we hear from ed tech is that they have these, products they've created, and in order to get them to fit in with the district, they've got to go in and customize and almost make unique products for each district. And that's challenging from a business model perspective. And I think you also hear the flip side of what I just repeated from the districts, which is they're so busy that it's hard to even get in the door and explain the value of your product. So interestingly, I think you can really hear like almost two sides of a coin. What I've observed is that I think ed tech solutions and products, by nature of the technology that we're harnessing, are often designed to solve one specific problem, but not the big problem. And so one limitation that I see is that if what we're really asking for is a broader vision of changing a system, I would posit like reimagining elements of education and for both students and the employees within it, the experiences they have. If you want to imagine that as a vision, it's really hard for an ed tech company to come up with a tool that does all of that, of course. Like they're going to be playing a part of a role. So there's something about how different products and solutions can be netted together or pulled together as more of a like complex set of stacked solutions that get to something bigger. My worry is if ed tech gets out ahead too far, they may start defining the problem for us and keeping it at a pretty small, low level, which is like help fix your math class or help fix student teacher dialogue. Those are very important problems, but it can miss the point of the big opportunities ahead of us. And I think it's quite possible for ed tech and systems to come together in a broader vision, but they've got to be brought together. And so actually it's funny, and now to come back to the Wicked Opportunities paper, one of the things that we proposed as a like concrete next step would be to do another convening like what we just did, but to have it be with systems leaders and ed tech leaders and maybe a couple of other sectors in there as well, but really to bring together those voices to do some complementary design work and problem solving together. Right now, it's really siloed. You have ed tech working in one silo, you have districts running their schools in another silo. And in order for, I think, truly transformative solutions to come about, they've got to be in the same room, co-designing and co-constructing. I think that it's possible to see examples of this with individual districts that pair with a firm or an ed tech provider, an engineering group, or whoever it may be, to create like a bespoke product for themselves. There are risks to that in that, you lose some of the uniformity or the the quality, the rigor of the product that sometimes you can get when it is like a firm or an ed tech company that makes one product for a lot of different situations. But I think in the bespoke model, what it offers is that partnership and that ability to over time evolve a product to start to solve multidimensional problems, really in response to whatever that district's needs are. So that product is though very expensive. It requires a lot of time in addition to financial resources. So it really requires a district to be like all in and a company to be all in. So there isn't one perfect answer, but I do think that there are some ways for us. And I think this is where, again, like more bright spots, more use cases are just going to help the field over the next couple of years. I do think that there are some promising potential collaborations. But I think that there's a place for bringing together these different, really these two systems now are dependent on each other. Districts no longer, really the problems we're trying to solve are not solvable without some technological aid and helping districts like think about how they use resources wisely. They are dependent and they need the technology to work for them. But at the same time, they need the technology providers obviously need districts to buy their products and need to know what products to design that are useful. So they really need each other. We don't have a long history of like bringing folks together. This is not like part of like superintendent's curriculum to like partner with ed tech providers, but it is an emerging need in our field to get more collaboration aligned and to figure out how to resource this time and money wise.
Yeah, I think so much of what you just shared like really stands out to me. I was immediately reminded of, as you were describing here, the opportunity ahead and the way that we have to focus on the commonalities, right, versus the differences. So I know Erin Moat was a part of this conversation, and I had the opportunity to talk with Erin a few months ago, and she has this like really insightful manifesto on her website talking about finding the 80% common in education. And I think her words, in this moment really stand out to me because she really describes how oftentimes in education, and I can understand this perspective as somebody who's worked in many school districts where we can have a little bit of this like special snowflake problem, right? Where, and again, it's not to say that school districts aren't unique because they definitely are. I mean, urban, suburban, rural school districts in Massachusetts versus school districts in Texas are very different. But that being said, that there are many challenges and opportunities that we do all face that are the opportunities. And I think the brilliant example she gives in this manifesto is the fact that that internet access was not widely available, and the fact that they were able to focus on that, provide fiber optic connections to ensure that every school had that. Now 99% of America's K-12 public schools have fiber optic. That's something we can all agree to, right? And so
Right.
it makes me wonder, what are the equivalents of this fiber optic for AI, right? What are these things that as a part of our vision and our metrics for success that we can all agree to that are absolutely part of that 80% common, I think, as you were describing there in your response.
Yeah, that's a great example. And Erin was a really powerful contributor at our convening. I think that exemplifies what you want to see. It also makes me think of this idea of cross pollination and the importance of ed tech companies bringing in educator experts to help shape what they're doing. I would actually argue any generative AI platform does need educator expertise in it and systems level expertise in it. I hope that companies are building out either both positions and advisory boards with really qualified and expert educational leaders, be it in a classroom or at the central office level, and vice versa, that districts can learn from the technology sector as well. And there may be ways to bring some of that insight and knowledge into their staffing or into training as well. We have a lot to learn from each other, and we're all really trying to solve the same problem, definitely through different mechanisms and with different visions and goal statement between like a district and an ed tech company. But we really are trying to solve the same problem. And so the more cross-pollination you can do, the better quality of idea swapping will happen. And I, again, like I think that's happening in pockets, but there's kind of a clarion call. I think where like teachers are really excited about this, school leaders are really excited about this. Maybe go get a position or find connections in this space and contribute at that level, and vice versa. This does remind me of one comment I heard at ASU GSV on a panel about this, about some of the cultural differences between ed tech and districts, which is districts are grounded often in relationships, and in a way that sometimes corporate America just may not be grounded in the same way. There's kind of some cultural differences. And there was a panel where I know one district leader was saying she ended up going with some ed tech products. They're quality products that had an evidence base, an emerging evidence base behind them. But really, it was that, and it was the fact that she could pick up the phone and call them at any moment. And the woman that she got connected to knew this district leader's family. She had like asked her questions. She knew about her as a person. It turns out that representative that she was working with was a former teacher leader. So that person knew how to build trust and how to build relationships. And then that set the table for them to be able to work together and build a cross-functional relationship.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, from the educational side, the work is just so challenging, and you really want to have confidence that in any of the partners that you choose to work with, that when the going gets tough, it's October, everybody's already exhausted, right? The work is starting to get very difficult and intense, and something happens, that your partners are going to be there with you, right? Lock arms in that moment, and in the ways that they are able to show up, right? Recognizing obviously they're not
Mhm.
teachers in the building, but they're really supporting you, and I think the common perception is like for a lot of these products is that to your point, it can feel very transactional. It feels like, no, you don't want to like lock arms with me and be in that moment in there. It's like, you want me to do this survey and give you all of my insights and dilute my entire 12-year experience as an educator into this one survey. And you want to just take findings from all these surveys and then use that to make your product and diminish that. And I think that there could be a lot of those perceptions. And so I think to your earlier point, this idea of really being able to on the tech side, like re-examine the ways of working and recognize that like when you're asking somebody to just fill out this survey or do something, it means a different thing when you ask a teacher to do that, given all that they hold, right? It's
Yeah.
not actually just this quick 5-minute survey that you're doing it. It's about honoring their experience. It's about bringing them in a deeper way. It's about compensation, right? And if you
Mhm.
want people to support, and so being able to invite people to the table in a deeper way to co-create that experience, I think it just, to your point, not only does it create better solutions on the ed tech side, but it also ensures that the cultural ways of working, the ways that we speak to each other feel a little bit more aligned. And then again, to your point on the education side, I mean, there's some adjustments that have to be made there as well. Like we do have to have a commitment to, the ed tech providers that we choose to work with, that we're partners, right? And so if they're asking for things, we can't always just be non-responsive. We can't always expect them to cater to
Mhm.
us. Like we have to actually communicate and give them what they need to support us to put them into positions to win as well. It can't just be, this transactionary relationship where we feel like they're, entering a servitude relationship to us and our needs, and we're not giving them,
Right.
setting them up for success in that too. So I do think that my observation across this with being very privileged to talk to a lot of different folks is that there is very much bridging that needs to happen on both sides. But I do think that the problems and the opportunities that the system is experiencing right now, or young people, our teachers are experiencing, it's the compromise is worth it. Like us being able to like really help each other do this, I think it is going to create a drastically different experience for a lot of folks throughout the educational experience if we can just find ways to accommodate each other that way and learn how to work with each other.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, how lucky are we that we're working in a space that has now generated so many different potential solutions. Now we are still the silver lining on having so many solutions that may or may not be working. We need to work through them. But yeah, I certainly could not create, I don't have any of the acumen to create any of the tools that I hope will help make my life easier. So we need to, there's a balance to be struck. There's just, it's again, just coming back to opportunities and how do you solve intractable problems differently. Part of how you do that is you bring you bring a diverse set of people around the table to design the solutions. And so I think that's what we're all saying here is like, let's try to break down some of these silos where we can and get a lot of big brains and hearts and trust built around some of these strategies. And, this is, and as we're talking, I'm thinking about just how expensive this all is too. And so just moving back into some policy observations, because that's often the level we fly at. There are going to be some compelling questions ahead of us in the coming years about how to resource this. And, absent changes in per pupil funding formulas, where does the funding come to help pay for some of these potential solutions and time? And also, this is not just about generative AI, but, another technological phenomenon is just data security and privacy. And we're seeing a lot of school systems under cyber attack, getting data becoming an asset that hackers are trying to access. And that the data systems and government systems need pretty sophisticated protections, and that costs money. And so as technology evolves and increases and improves, so does the cost to school systems. And I think that that is another interesting policy question for us, is for us as taxpayers. Are we willing to pay more into education because we know that we need to keep pace with the technological changes? Are policymakers willing to acknowledge the rising costs that go alongside both the obligations to protect data and also the potential of these opportunities ahead of us? So they're not answers to this, but I think there's some interesting questions. Hopefully also some of the technological gains build efficiencies, and that maybe there's going to be some way to recoup or shift funds. I think that would be the perfect scenario, but that's another question that I know, is also coming up, which is just how do you make sure money is being spent well? How do you build the case that the tools that people or systems are investing in are actually worth the investment? And then how do we know that there's enough funding to invest in appropriate solutions?
Yeah, I could not agree more. And to your point, I mean, when we think about the way that we all need to work together to make this happen, I mean, this is obviously a tremendous role for our philanthropic community to really dictate, not just obviously prioritize and really push for funding and opportunities for school districts and education institutions to be able to access that funding, but again, for what types of things, right? Being able to really signal to schools where, based on research and based on best practices that they've been able to identify in their work with funding other types of use cases, being able to signal which ones they've actually seen promise behind to schools. To your earlier point, so many of the institutions that are doing this work right now, I mean, they're doing it with all of the hidden costs associated. Like, they're taking it all on, right? Like, they are choosing to do this because they think it's important. They're creating bandwidth where it's probably really difficult to create. They're funding it when, maybe they have a funder, but maybe they don't. And so if we really expect to systematize this, we do need to have robust policy. We need to create opportunities for training, as you were describing. And again, we need to have funding. I mean, I know just in my own experiences in this past 12 months, a lot of school districts are singing a different tune right now around their commitment to spend money than they were prior to this year because of the ESSER funding cliff, right? And for context, for folks who may not know, ESSER was like the large federal funding that many schools and education institutions were benefiting from, as a result of the pandemic and the extra financial resources that the federal government felt schools needed to have. But the first thing to go right now is a lot of the things that we're talking about here: technology, partnerships, all of those things, because what they are not going to try to do, obviously, is to cut their people, right? To cut salaries and to cut those things. They would obviously like to preserve that as much as they can. And, that's the first thing to go. And so it does feel absent of a new injection of funds into the landscape. In absence of this, it is going to be difficult to really see that tipping point we were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
So Bree, I know we've spent a little bit of while talking about this paper. Again, we really invite folks to dig in and read Wicked Learnings. I think from my perspective, I feel like I gained so much just checking that out, and really just grateful to you all for organizing these types of meetings to make sure that we have folks from different perspectives having these. I really think, to your point, it's going to take a full court press, right? It's going to take all of us from different vantage points really working together, trying to create that shared alignment, trying to create a shared vision, trying to actually develop metrics that might work for us to adopt those behaviors that we're hoping to see to make this happen, right? And to really also define, what does make this happen mean? What else are you all working on right now? So what do we have to look forward to in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned we're going to be dipping our toes into, we hope, some of these questions around how you measure success and how you measure how you build evidence behind AI enabled solutions. We'd like to see that. We've played this role in the past, especially during the pandemic. We'd like to be bringing together national researchers and leaders for some collaboratively designed work. And we'd love to see a national research agenda surface. We think it's really important to get ahead of this. I mean, similar to what Aaron was saying around the internet. We've had other technologies come to bear. We have not necessarily gotten ahead of them. I think social media is a great example. And so we want to really learn from our previous actions and say, hey, let's get ahead of this. Let's build some coordinated, collaborative national research priorities around the things that matter most to schools and systems. Another concrete thing that we're doing as I'm running a study right now on districts and school systems that are in that early adopter category of AI. So there's systems that are putting in place system-wide strategies and approaches to AI, and that might be via partnerships with some AI-enabled tools. It might be piloting new strategies in classrooms, instructional strategies or pedagogical strategies. It might be approaching professional development in new ways and building out AI literacy in their staffs or other things. So we are just about to launch focus groups with superintendents and district leaders to understand the systems perspective on that. I'll put a plug out that if you work in a school district that you're doing this work where your AI is a part of your toolkit or a part of your strategic plan for solving a big problem, we would love to learn from you. So reach out to me if you want to be a part of the study. We will start interviews in October, and we're hoping to take what we learn from these leaders back out to the field to help mobilize where resources could be going to support these systems and how other players in the space can wrap around and support districts. When I was mentioning the wicked opportunities takeaways, one of the takeaways we said was we think we need to all be wrapping around and supporting districts. So this should help inform ways that we can do that by getting their perspective out into the field. We're also doing a little bit of work right now looking at higher education, teachers' colleges, and how they're thinking about preparing the next generation of teachers. So that's some interesting work going on. And I'd love to see us, something we're playing around with and we may dive into in the next 6 to 12 months, is thinking about how AI has the potential to transform the role of the teacher. And more than just like putting in, getting lesson plans from like a tool like Magic School, which is fantastic, but really like reimagining the role and how could teaching, I hate to say get a facelift, but get a facelift. Like how could teaching start to represent 2024 and what we know teachers want in today's day and age? I think that I'm a former teacher. I think the teaching role really has shifted and evolved. And I've always thought that, before I retire, I want to go back and teach for a couple of years. And I had this realization recently that I was like, it's been really different. Like actually, when I go back, if I do go back and teach, it will not be like when I was a teacher back in 2002. But it still hasn't evolved fully. And there are some things that are exactly the same. And so many professions are evolving to meet the new technologies and our new economies and new lifestyles and preferences. So we are still thinking about that, but I think that would be a space that we will likely try to get into as well in some of our future research.
Yeah, that last question especially is very interesting. And I think there's many folks listening to this who definitely don't disagree with you around that, right? If you're telling a teacher that instead of the 12 hats they currently have to wear now that they may only have to wear 6 hats, and those are the most important 6, they'd be like, sure, take those hats off my plate. That sounds great. So I think they'd be excited by that. I also know that I had an opportunity a few months ago to talk to Alexander Sidorkin, who is running an AI center out of Sacramento State. And he actually has some really interesting pieces around the role of a teacher in a world of AI as well. And he talks about in one of his blog posts how what will be especially critical in that moment is going to be the relational aspects of teaching, the mentorship they provide, the social emotional learning, that support, less the instructional aspects, right? Because now that exchange of information, that exchange of some of that can happen through technology is now strong enough to be able to handle some of the pieces of that teacher experience. But what obviously cannot be replaced, at least as of today, and is vital is the relational aspect to that. And so I can definitely send you his blog post as well if that's something that'd be helpful to think about, the way that he breaks down the role a little bit there.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Bree, really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining us for this
Oh
conversation.
my gosh, it's so great. It goes so fast. Hopefully, if you're a listener too, it certainly goes fast when you're talking about this stuff. And getting a chance to just step back and reflect with you makes you realize how both like how fast things are moving, but also how they're deepening. Like it does feel like there's a rooting happening. And I hope we can keep maybe in that metaphor, keep the soil fertile and vast for deeper rooting in a lot of different domains. But it's a lot to reflect on with you, how much has shifted in just 6 months again. And I think it will, next time we talk, there's going to be the same realization.
Yeah, I expect those epiphanies to keep on coming. You're absolutely right. Thanks so much for your time today, Bree.
Yeah, thank you. Be well.